Perfect. Thank you so much all for introducing yourselves. So now we're going to move on to some prepared questions. So the first question for our panelists is, what is the most exciting or interesting part of your job? And the four of you can answer that in whatever way you want. If you'd like to go in the order you just introduced yourselves, or just kind of popcorn around, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I can go first. So for me, it's really the opportunities to help people. Of course, I work with older records, and the privilege or the proximity I have to those records is not lost on me. But what really is exciting to me is getting to help people. And that really can look like so many different things. For some people, it's coming in and they need a copy of their marriage certificate to get their real ID. For other people, I've helped them get their paperwork so they can become US citizens. So there's just a really wide variety in the types of things we do. And I am someone who can get kind of bored easily. And so having something new every day just really keeps me excited and passionate about it. You really just never know what you're going to see or what questions you're going to get asked. Sometimes I say that reference is kind of like the hamster wheel, because there's always a new research request or a record request. So it definitely keeps me engaged. Part of my job is to answer emails, to answer phone calls, to work the circulation desk, to work the lobby, to fulfill online orders. So it really is something different every day. And of course, I see, really old records. And I think for me, one of the coolest ones we have is we have the birth record of Frederick Douglass. And I just like, how cool is that? Um, so yeah, definitely the opportunities to help people. Nothing beats having a patron standing in the search room, like crying and hugging you, just being so thankful and feeling so validated in the work that we're doing. Because of course, the flip side is that plenty of people can be dismissive and like, oh, well, everything will be on the computer. So it's just nice to feel useful and actually have uh, tangible ways to help the public.
I can go next. I think for me, the most exciting thing is again, like interfacing with my students, which is my public. One thing like I'm really interested to talk about is how teaching is public history, especially in a master's program where most of our students don't go on to a PhD program. So what I get to do, which I think is pretty cool, is get to train them in modes of historical thinking that they will then bring wherever they are. So we have everyone for graduating who becomes like, you know, kind of more traditional career paths, whether that be in like education or working in archives or libraries, all the way up to like people who become like bankers. And I want that banker to be able to think historically. So getting to kind of shape their minds in that way and oversee their projects as their advisor, getting to kind of share my experience doing history with them, and trying to get them to understand how to translate their archival work into something that's consumable for the public, is probably the most rewarding thing that I get to do.
I can go next. So the most rewarding thing I do is I research the Revolutionary War basically for a living at this point. I research new topics and I write exhibits. That's kind of what I do. I do a little bit of care of collections, so I get to work with really neat old objects. So like Darby, when you said you have Frederick Douglass's birth certificate, that like piqued my interest because we have the interesting stuff. Not that interesting, but we have good stuff like that. But I get to spend my entire day researching my favorite thing in the world, which is American Revolution, and getting paid to do it. It's pretty cool to be able to get paid to do your passion.
And like everybody else here, I would say my favorite thing about my job is also the people that I work with. Not only my coworkers, but the people that I've had the opportunity to interact with while I'm collaborating on projects with people in the community. Um, I've met some incredibly talented individuals who are doing just monumental work or have done monumental work in Indian country. And it's just fantastic to be able to meet people and see what they're doing. And as I mentioned, as being one of the four members of the Cultural Preservation Department, I've also experienced cultural learning opportunities, which are kind of they're not necessarily few and far between, but when they pop up, they're really exciting. And they've kind of fanned some of the creative flames that I have within me, being like a almost art major. And it's expanded my understanding of the world around me and like my place in it. So it's just a really cool, like spiritual opportunity in a way as well.
Okay, thank you all so much for answering that first question. So our next question is, what is the most challenging thing about your current job or your work?
So the most exciting thing is working with the people, but the most challenging is also kind of working with the people. There's a duality to that. My job is to make the records accessible, but my job is also to protect and preserve the records. And so people just don't understand what that entails sometimes. And sometimes, it is a customer service job also. And there are aspects of customer service I'm sure we're all aware of that are less than pleasant sometimes. But besides that side of it, it's also really easy to get stuck in the weeds, to have so many ideas and so many things we want to make accessible, and so many outreach programs we want to run, or different ways to get involved. It can be very easy to start a lot of projects, but not actually finish any of them or see them through. And so for me, very specifically, that is something that is challenging, of not having so many ideas up in the clouds and actually getting down, doing the work and seeing them through. So I have constant to-do lists, but that's a pro for me also. Like I said, I like being busy and having new things to be engaging, but it's really finding that balance, and not just getting stuck on the hamster wheel of, oh, here's another email, and then abandoning long-term projects. There are so many short-term things that have to be balanced against long-term projects.
Yeah, I think very similarly. I think there's like the universal rule for like every job. It's about balancing for me as well. It's super challenging to like balance all the various like roles that I get thrown into. So it's a teaching position, but I'm also expected to do advising. I'm also expected to like consult with people, do admissions, things like that, all while working on like my own research, and doing my own kind of like public talks in different forums. So yeah, it's rewarding, certainly, but having to like have all those balls up in the air at one time can be a little bit daunting. And I think also another really challenging thing for me is experiencing the kind of like emotions of my students. I think like anyone who's done any sort of project gets to that point, myself included, where they feel like they're out in the middle of the lake, right? And you like can't go back, but like you're not sure if you can go forward either, and you just can't see the finish line at all. And helping them kind of get through that moment is a pretty big challenge.
The biggest challenge at my work is funding. So I work for small museums. I've always worked at small museums, and we are constantly struggling with funding. And one of the biggest issues is we have to keep producing to prove that we should be open, that we should be getting funding, but we're compared to these huge institutions that have quadruple our budget, quadruple the staff, but we're still held at those same standards. And that is really, really difficult to keep up with. So I know when I put something together, it's looked at as something I'm doing it myself. I'm the only one. I'll have people proofread. You always have people proofread exhibits and things like that. But it's just me doing it. And I get compared to a staff that has like 15 people writing exhibits. So that is really challenging. And to try to not get frustrated by that is always difficult too. Like, I think it was Darby who said, you have a constant list of things to do and you don't have the funding to do it. So that is something that never gets old, and you do almost get used to it. It's almost common for me to like come up with an idea. Me and my amazing coworkers will brainstorm it, we'll get it moving, and then it just sits on a table hoping we'll get funding someday. And that is just something we do, and we deal with it. And once in a while the funding comes through and you're ready and it's awesome, but it's a constant challenge of funding.
I would say the biggest challenge for my work is about pacing. I come from an academic background and from city government, and moving into tribal government, things kind of go around the calendar year depending on what's going on. And then also, I was hired with a blank canvas essentially. I said I'm in an department of 4, but as far as like in the archival sector, it's just me, and I'm supposed to be in charge of tribal archives, a research library, and an exhibit gallery, and curating exhibits. And so being in the beginning stages of that, it takes time to build the foundation. So the majority of my work this past year has been writing policy and kind of setting core documents and sort of like how you want to move forward. And it can be a little discouraging because you have all these great, wonderful ideas that you want to get to, but knowing that it takes time to accomplish those things and moving forward.
Okay, so our last prepared question is, what do you wish you knew about the field of public history before beginning your career?
I wish I knew to not be so scared of it. Like I said, I went to Gettysburg College, so I was surrounded by people very intensely interested in the Civil War, and I'm just not someone who recites dates of battles or knows names of generals, and it always gave me an inferiority complex that I just didn't have a spot. And so when I got involved in libraries and eventually archives and kind of found my little groove, of making things accessible and helping just your everyday person in the public access historical records, finding that really made it less intimidating for me. So I wish I didn't have such a narrow view of what public history was and was more aware of what it could be, because I would never have considered myself to be in public history for a long time, not at all through college, probably not through grad school, probably only really in the last few months or so. So just to be less scared of it, and know that it was more than military history, basically.
I think for me, I wish that I had known from the outset that public history is in some ways its own thing with its own methodologies, right? And own skill sets. Um, that's one thing. And the other thing is that people really do have a desire to learn and think about the past. I often joke that like business is really good when the world is bad, which is unfortunate, but I think it also transcends. And I think we're seeing a lot currently in the political environment that there's a lot of bad faith interlocutors, but I think there are even more good faith ones.
I wish I knew how cutthroat the museum field is. It's very, very competitive. There is 10 people waiting for your job at all times. So if like I stepped away from my job, there would be 10 people they could fill it with tomorrow. So you always have to be on your A game. And that is something I wish I knew immediately in the field. I kind of had to learn that as I went. But now that I've been in the field 10 years, it's also, I kind of like that now. I think it's good to constantly have to be on your A game, but I also give myself grace. Like you have to give yourself grace. Like you can't be on your A game every single day. I also wish I better understood how little museum employees are paid versus the expectations. There are many, many, many weeks when I'm expected to work for free. So I get my 40 hours and then you have to work for free the rest of the time. And it's illegal, but it happens all the time. And that's kind of the museum field. It's a passion. You do it because you love what you do. I get to spend my days researching the topic that interests me the most. But there's also downsides. And I guess it would just be understanding the work-life balance and being prepared to have to really figure that out. I had to figure that out right away, and I'm still trying to figure it out, but that would be the hardest part.
I would say that I wish I would have understood there's not like a single path forward to success. I know a lot of times coming from academic backgrounds that academia sort of perpetuates that if you're going to have reputability or any sort of standing, that you have to have these certain qualifications. And in my experience in this job, traveling around, meeting officials and counterparts from different tribes and just other people doing this kind of cultural work, some people have terminal education and some people are kind of raised into what they're doing. And while education can be very helpful in sort of addressing certain things, I don't think it's necessarily like it's not necessarily a predictor of someone's ability to do good work or to make an impact on their community.
Hey, thank you all. That got us through our prepared questions. So Mary Kate, do we want to start with the pre-submitted audience questions before opening up? Okay, perfect. So we're going to open up to some questions from the audience, but a few of you submitted pre-submitted questions when you registered. So we're going to go ahead and start with those, and then we can move on to audience questions. So the first pre-submitted question we have is, after how many rejection letters should an applicant be concerned about their approach to the field?
I'll hop in and answer this one. So in the museum field, if this is what people want to go, you're going to get a lot of rejection, a lot of rejection emails, a lot of rejection letters. But the best thing you can do is not take it personal and ask what you could do differently. Sometimes you'll get a response that's really helpful and they'll be like, hey, I didn't think you had a strong cover letter. And then you can learn to do that better. But a lot of times in the field of museums, at least, jobs go to people who the hiring manager already knows or knows somebody who knows. So really don't take it personal if you don't get the job. If you apply for 100 jobs and get 100 rejection letters, it very likely has nothing to do with you and your skills. It just might be not the right situation in that moment. So definitely always ask what you could do better. And it really does help you get to when you find the right situation in the right spot, you'll be more ready for it. But yeah, you're gonna get a lot, and never get discouraged, because I can't tell you how many rejection letters I've got.
Do any of our other panelists have anything to add to that? Okay, perfect. So we can go ahead and go to the next question. So another pre-submitted question is, many of us are well-rounded as a result of previous work/education, which of course is great. But how do we stand out for positions that are perhaps more specific/narrowed?
And kind of to piggyback on what she just said, I think networking is really important and getting out there and meeting different people that are in the field who are doing things that you are interested in. I've had a lot of experience or just good experience at conferences. So being able to go out and meet different people, talk to them, kind of hash out your interests. Yeah, networking.
Okay, and our last pre-submitted question, and this one is great because Jacey was actually just talking about this, is are graduate study degrees required in public history, and what degrees are most useful?
So I can talk to this one. Graduate study is not required. Multiple of my coworkers do not have masters. They did the undergrads and then interned at the Maryland State Archives, and then are working with us now straight out of undergrad. So not required, at least in my side of the field. I can't speak to others. But we have people working for us who have degrees all over. Like I said, I have psychology and studio art for undergrad. I have coworkers who degrees are in English, of course, history. I think someone even has some forensic science background. So it really is all over the place for the archives. And similarly, when I was involved in libraries, people had degrees in a variety of different fields. I'd say history and English are pretty common ones to have, but I have not come across any situation where I was at a detriment for not having any degree in public history. So yeah, I would not say it is required.
I'll hop in and say, so in the museum world to be a curator, you definitely have to have a graduate degree or a PhD. And it depends what level you want to work at. So I work at small museums, so I'm able to get away with just a master's degree. But if I wanted to move from the curator position I am right now, if I wanted to move vertically at all as a curator, I would need my PhD. And that is just on the resume. That's like the first thing they ask. Do you have your PhD or have you done graduate work? And that kind of is that's like right up front. To work at a smaller museum, though, you can get away with just a master's degree, but you have to have a lot of research backing you as you walk in.
Hey, Alex or Jacey, any last thoughts on those questions? We're good? Okay, so we can go ahead and move to audience questions. So Mary Kate already put it in the chat, but if you didn't see it, feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So the first one that we have on here is from Karen, and she asks, how do you find a great place for an internship and how do you get one?
For museums, just start emailing museums. Anyone within your vicinity that you can drive, walk, get a bus to, just start emailing. And even if they say that they're not accepting interns at that time, they will within the next year. So I know sometimes at my museum, we don't accept them at certain times of the year. Like we'll just have projects that are not aligning with the museum work, but within that fiscal year, we will have them. And I do keep those emails. So if you email me in April, you want an internship and I don't have anything until the fall, I will reach back out to you. And I know some other museums are like that, but that's at least how this field works. But just email. It's okay to cold call.
Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry, Darby.
Oh, no, it's okay. So like I said, it was a series of kind of fortunate events that led me to be at the Maryland State Archives. And for me, it was pretty strictly geography based. I was in school, I had a full-time job, and those were two things that I couldn't just stop doing to get a field study or internship. And so I kind of cold call emailed the Maryland State Archives and said, hey, like I really need a field study. Do you have any openings? And fortunately for me, they were able to take me on even though it wasn't something advertised. So I would echo what Sarah said. Just reach out. You don't know. The worst they're going to say is no. But the best outcome is that they'll say yes, and it'll lead to really great opportunities. The same thing kind of happened for me while I was an undergrad. I got an internship at the library I was working at. Again, I was going to school, had other jobs. It really had to fit within geography for me, but it worked out. So just don't be afraid to ask, even if you're not seeing something on the website right away.
Okay. So moving on to our next question from Madison. Have you / your institutions experienced a feeling of urgency to carry out your work / mission in recent years? How are you embracing or addressing it?
I can start with this one. I definitely have been feeling a lot of urgency lately. When I first started grad school, I was told that like my field was dead, Southern history, and like studied like the Civil War, which turned out to be very much not the case. And with starting really like with Dylan Roof in 2015 and then Charlottesville in 2017, like these are all just like escalated the need to reach out to like public forums with writing for like op-eds and stuff like that, doing public lectures, speaking to like different organizations and alumni sessions, that I don't think I would have necessarily felt or knew I was going to feel when I first started training for this job like a decade ago.
I'll pop in again. In the museum world, we are focused on the 250th. It's 2026, the 250th of our nation. And we are really pushing forward because all of a sudden there's funding for museums, history museums, and we haven't had funding in years. It's been so difficult to get grants, but now all of a sudden they're popping up because people want to educate on the revolution. So right now there is a really exciting sense of urgency, at least in the any of the museums focused on the revolution. It's fun. But we have to produce like crazy right now. So it is like exhibit after exhibit, paper after paper, lecture after lecture. But it's really fun. So it's exciting right now.
I would say there is a sense of urgency in some of the work that I'm doing right now as well, specifically because we're working on preservation. And so we have elders who continue to age, and we're wanting to get oral histories recorded and important culture information written down and documented so that we have it as we're building the culture back. But also we're sort of in a political moment that's favorable to Indigenous causes, riding on the back of McGirt and some of the other legislation that has come through. And so I think a lot of tribal nations are, they're doing the good work that they can while the public is supportive of this work. And you're seeing museums and bigger institutions turn towards decolonization and working towards shared stewardship. The Smithsonian just released a shared stewardship policy, and that's a big deal. That's something that a lot of people never thought would happen, because their collections were never meant to be shared. And so just doing the work while it's available, that's something everybody's kind of mulling over right now.
And I'd say for the state archives, definitely. I'm newer to the field. I graduated in 2020. But with the pandemic came a big question of how are we going to make these records, these government records of the state, more accessible to patrons who can no longer visit us in person. And so there's been just such a huge push to get records online, to make it so people don't have to come in. We don't want people to not be able to access birth, death, and marriage records, things that are needed for everyday life. And so that's really become a forefront of a lot of our work is how do we get these to people? How do we safely get them to people? How do we make people know that we have them? So it's definitely been an urgent need. People don't realize how long digitization takes. So yeah, it's definitely urgent in terms of pandemic and accessibility for the state archives.
Okay, so moving on to the next audience question. Thank you all. For people who have entered the field a bit later in life, how did you navigate? I'm a career changer, and sometimes career advice is a bit geared towards undergrads.
So I didn't get into the field as a career change. I got into the field pretty young, but I am like I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I have kids. So trying to balance that like work life is really is really difficult. So I think maybe I can help a little bit with this question. And the biggest career, the way to navigate is like really setting yourself up for success of like how much can I dedicate every day to what I want to do and figuring that out and then really sticking to it. Like, so I could easily work 10 hours a day right now. We are that busy. But I have to come home and I have to make lunch and make dinner and make sure my dog's fed, make sure I spend time with my kids. So it really is understanding what you want to accomplish, setting realistic goals for yourself, and then working your little tush off until you get to it. But it really is self-motivation in this field. And I do agree a lot of the advice you're going to get is for undergrads, but as somebody who's trying to balance it all, it really has to be something that you like set yourself up for success for, because no one else is going to. In this field, it's a lot of ask, and you have to know when to say no. So that would be my biggest advice.
Do we have any more thoughts on that question, or are we ready to move on?
I'll chime in. Mary Kate suggested since the question is about career changes. So I'm Michael Yee, and I'm the other co-chair for this committee, and so thrilled that all of you are here. So I did a kind of a late career change, formerly being in IT project management and technical lead for many years at Cal State University San Marcos. but I always loved history, was involved with museums then at the governance level. And so I went back and basically retired, earned my master's in history as a general American history. But then because I was connected with the museum, then I could really connect those two. So it's been, I think a rewarding, change. I was able to then teach at a community college, as well as then have a teaching opportunity for first year program, which is basically teaching first year students coming into college. So with a master's degree, I was able to pursue that and have enjoyed that teaching element. It's also then given me that flexibility if I want to participate in the professional historical associations like the National Council on Public History. That gives me great motivation, some and then something to be able to share and speak with different colleagues at NCPH. So I'll just say it's a rewarding switch. I am able to work just part-time, so if you're able to do that, that's great. But you can also, I've seen many of my teaching colleagues pursue that, and may take a while to get into the community college arena teaching as a full-time, but you're able to pursue that. I'll share and be happy to answer more questions if somebody has a particular interest. Thank you for suggesting that, Mary Kate.
Thank you so much, Michael. If you have any more questions about that, feel free to put it in the chat. And so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next audience question. Going back to needing a PhD to be a curator in museums, would the same be true for someone whose job title is collections manager as well?
So I think I can answer this one. So you don't need a PhD to be a curator at a smaller institution. So if you are working at a mid-sized to small museum, you can get away with a museum studies degree, a master's in museum studies or American history, anything like that, any type of master's of arts, you can get away with it, but you do have to have the research to back you. Like, why can you take these really complex ideas and present them to the public in an accessible way? You do have to be able to prove that. And you can do that with a master's degree. If you're in the right program, it will set you up for that. To be at the Met or these bigger sites like that, those bigger institutions in the cities, you will need a PhD for them to even look at your resume. And if that's what you want, that's what you're gonna have to do. But if it's something smaller you're looking for, you don't need that PhD. I'm at a spot now that if I wanted to move up, I would have to go to one of those bigger institutions and get that PhD. With that said, for a collections manager, no. Collections manager usually have master's degree and they have whatever undergrad they want. So I have seen a lot of artists like studio, photography, painting, history, poli-sci, all these different backgrounds for collections management, and then they go and get that either a certificate or a master's. You're usually seeing a master's degree for collections management, because that is definitely more geared to just taking care of objects. So it's less writing, it's a little bit less research, and it's more geared to making sure the environment's okay for the objects. Does the object fit into your collection? If there's mold, what do you do? Are your files organized? Working with the public to see if you want an object or if you don't, and working with donors and things like that. So it's a totally different position, and a master's is perfectly fine for it. Sometimes you can get away with it if you have a bachelor's and you have a lot of experience. So if you're working part-time while you're getting your bachelor's, or just a career transition, you're working part-time or volunteering in a collections, and you're working under somebody good, you can get away with just a bachelor's degree too. But you do have to have that that little with either like internship or part-time work.
Okay, unless we have any more thoughts on that question, we're good to move on to the next audience question. All right, perfect. So our next question is, as an undergrad with interests across public history, how do any of you have any insights on how they gravitated towards this career? With grad programs in historic preservation, public history, and museum studies, I am unsure what I want to work towards.
I can kick this one off. I advise people like this all the time. I'd say my biggest piece of advice is throw away thinking about the nouns of like the job position currently and really do some like insight and introspection into like what are the verbs you like, by which I mean like, is your top tier thing writing? Is it researching? Is it, if it's preservation, like do you like fixing documents? You like that kind of thing? Like what really motivates you? And then once you have that collection of verbs, you'll see that that can apply to like any number of jobs. I think that's something important to keep in mind too, as we've talked about like things like rejection and how getting jobs can often be down to someone's like mood or back channel things that you have no idea about. So I think focusing on the actual activities that you like to do as part of a job's role will really keep like a lot of doors open for you.
I would definitely echo that, be open. I was just so dead set on that. I wanted to be an academic librarian. That was the only thing I wanted to do. And I don't work in academics or libraries now, and it has been the best experience. But in terms of while you're an undergrad, don't discount things that don't have labels like internships. Like if you can go volunteer, kind of discern things you're going to do. It doesn't have to be called an internship or a field study. Just kind of try and get your toes wet in different areas, and that can kind of help discern. But like Alex said, the verbs really great. I knew I just wanted to talk to people on the front line. That was what mattered to me. And once I let go of all the other stuff, it made things fall into place much easier.
Echoing what everyone else has said, just kind of like follow your passions. I, as having a Bachelor of General Studies, I sort of like learned everything that I could in undergrad because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do exactly. And like I said, I got into the museum field through a service learning class, and we were actually conserving textiles, a textile collection. And so getting hands-on with textiles, that was something from the art side of me that I was really interested in. And then it just sort of led into the research, the curation, making exhibits, all that sort of thing. So if you have the opportunity to try out different roles that are within the public history field and kind of find what you vibe with, you might have a better idea of something that suits you.
Okay, so our next question is, do any of you have or have had a mentor? If so, how did you develop your mentor-mentee relationship?
I'll pop in again. So I'm not sure if he would consider himself my mentor, but I consider him my mentor. My previous boss, Chris Wiseman at the Joplin Museum, is fantastic, and I got to, I don't know, he took me under his wing, and I was his little chick for like a long time, and so he just took me through all of the different things that is part of keeping a museum running, and I got to try my hand, like I said, at pretty much everything that being in a small museum, because as has been mentioned, when you get into a larger facility, all the roles are kind of compartmentalized. We're in a small museum. You're responsible for everything from cleaning the toilets to putting together exhibits. So you learn how to do all sorts of things. And he really helped me through finding that work-life balance, which is so important because when you're passionate about something, you will take it home with you. And so being able to leave those things at work and the emotions that are attached to some things, that's really important. But I've walked away, thanks to Chris, with an unusually large understanding of tri-state minerals. So if anybody needs a rock identified, I got you.
I did not have a mentor. I desperately wanted one when I started out in the field, and anybody who I would get a chance to work with that I thought was someone who was doing really good work in the field, I would try to gravitate towards them, but it just like never worked out that they wanted to take anybody under their wing. So I did not have one. I think what was more helpful for me than having a mentor, which I wish I had one, I think it would have probably helped me with a lot of mistakes I made that I did eventually learn from, was just networking. You have to network, you have to make friends everywhere. Like if you're at a conference, you're shaking hands, getting to know people. If you hear someone talking at the conference about a museum that you like or a topic you like, you go introduce yourself. And in this field, people are used to that. So don't feel like you're going to bombard somebody with something that you're passionate about. We're all passionate in this field. Nobody goes into history because they want to make money or they're getting pressure from their family to be a historian. It doesn't really happen that way. So we're all passionate and everybody wants to talk about what they do. So just go say hi, make those connections. And that's what helped me more than a mentor, even though I do think they're really helpful. And I do wish I had one.
Um, so we do have a question from Mary Kate asking Alex to talk more about his role at Disney. So she said, Alex, I would love to hear more about your role at Disney. Everyone else, what is an unexpected job / duty you have done in the public history field?
Yeah, so essentially, I don't know how to phrase it other than I felt really lost after undergrad and didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did know that I wanted to educate in some way. Um, but it felt like at that time I was deciding between Teach for America and an internship with Disney. And I felt like Teach for America was like a little bit too close to what I kind of knew I would really like. Um, and so I decided to go the opposite direction to make sure. And then it just so happened that the internship was in a division that runs history tours of the park, kind of talking one about how the park was made, but also how it intersects with like American history as you walk through this kind of like physical historiography. So it was super fun. I like to say that it truly made me a better communicator and a better teacher because you're out there and you're by yourself for 5 hours walking around, basically giving like a 5 hour lecture, communicating with people. And I do think, for better or for worse, like a lot of kind of education in a public and academic setting is kind of customer service and knowing how to interact with people and get them to see what you're trying to communicate clearly.
I worked at a zoo. So I worked as so basically if you became a member and adopted a zoo animal, I would introduce you to the animal. But I actually learned a lot about living collection doing that. So it was during my grad program. It was a summer. I needed a job. And I was like, you know what, let's do something different. Because I'd worked in a museum and I was a tour guide and I needed something different. So I saw this job pop up and I was like, this is kind of awesome. So I introduced people to like tortoises, lions, rhinos, cheetahs, vultures, you name it. But I really got a great introduction on how living collections, there's curators at zoos. And the job description is very similar to mine when I take care of I take care of objects and I write exhibits. They're doing the same thing, but it's for stuff that's actively alive. And it was very interesting to see, like when I buy stuff from my collection, I'm buying like a HEPA vacuum. They're buying alfalfa, but it was really fascinating and it was really eye-opening. So like kind of to echo what Alex is saying, that it's okay to like try a job that's a little bit out of what you're focused on because you will learn from it. And it's also fun. Like I had a ton of fun working at that zoo.
Okay, it looks like we have one more audience question. And also, if any of you were interested in the question earlier about switching careers, Michael has been answering some of those questions in the chat, and there's a really good conversation going on in there if you wanted to look more into that. But our last question is, does anyone have any advice about prioritizing your mental health / practicing self-care in such a competitive and difficult field?
I am extremely passionate about this topic. So none of you know me, but I'm a very anxious type A person. And one of the most helpful pieces of advice I was ever given in school is that no one dies in libraries and archives. I was so on edge about knowing the answer to every reference question, how to find the resource. You name it, I was anxious about it. And one of my instructors was like, Darby, you need to relax. Like, if you don't finish this today, it's going to be okay. This isn't a hospital. Your mistakes are not killing anyone. And that seems so obvious. Like, of course, me not knowing which will or inventory to pull isn't going to kill anyone. But it was just revolutionary to me, to just take a step back and be like, okay, like this is important work. It's not to minimize the work we do, but it's going to be okay. And then in terms of work-life balance, that was something else that was hard for me, but also really important. I've only worked in the government side of things. I haven't worked in the public or in the private side, but I'm not allowed to work over 40 hours. They are incredibly strict about it. Once I hit 40 hours, I have to be done. If I check email or respond to an email, I immediately get told, Darby, stop checking email, you're not working. So if that is something you are prone to, that is something nice. It can be very frustrating to me as someone who wants to keep doing more, but working for free is not, they don't like that, at least in the state government for me. So there are pros and cons to government and private sector. So you can definitely think about that. I could go on and on about mental health. So if anyone else has anything else they want to say, I'll let them jump in, but it's just prioritize it. No one dies. Take a deep breath.
No one dies. And also, like, you do better work if you take that moment to really like take care of yourself. And I find that there are like lots of feedback loops. So like I get something from like going to museum that, right, like myself, that I wouldn't have gotten by reading about it, right? Or like doing my particular role. I think you just have to keep in mind that like, yeah, showing up for yourself first is the most important thing. I know that can be really challenging when you're fortunate enough to like do something that you're also really passionate about, because it will just eat up as much time as you possibly let it.
I want to echo what Darby said. So, like I said, I've been in the field about 10 years. So I've seen a lot of people like come into the field. And when I meet new employees or new coworkers or people who are just really interested in the field, I always tell them like, no one's gonna die. Like I literally probably say that like once a month at our job. No one's gonna die. If the museum does not open today, will we have some people upset that they drove here and they wanted to see it? Yes. And should we be open? Yes. But no one will die. And I say that all the time because people really, when you bring passion into things, a lot of emotions get high, and you have to keep reminding yourself of that, as we intentionally did not become doctors or surgeons or therapists. Nothing is gonna, no one's life is gonna be altered by us having to take a break. I also find that like decorating my office with things that make me happy also helps too. As a typical millennial, I'm really into Harry Potter. So I have a lot of Harry Potter decorations, and sometimes I'll play like the Harry Potter soundtracks. And it's just little things that do keep my stress down throughout the day.
And I would just add that I think it's something that kind of everybody in the field struggles with, especially when there's passion involved. And so most people tend to be pretty understanding of your mental health. And for me, when we're doing cultural work, and because it has such a weightiness and such an importance, it's actually something that was stressed at the ATOM conference, which is the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums, is taking time for yourself. Because if you're doing something that's being done for the first time, if you burn out, then the next person would have to start over like from scratch, you know? So like the work that you're doing is important, but it's also important that you take care of yourself because you are part of the work that you're doing. So.
Okay, so I know that we are at the end of our time, but we did have one question that we wanted to end on. Before I ask that, I did want to say if any of the panelists are okay with people who are attending contacting them, if you want to go ahead and put in your emails and contact information in the chat. Also, if you registered for this event, the reminder email should have had LinkedIn's linked to it, I believe. So you can always connect that way. So if you didn't have a chance for your question to be asked, feel free to reach out to these people or to NCPH. But our last question is, how do you see your work intersecting with or shaping the field of public history?
I guess I'll just start. So I am a neurodivergent. I have ADHD and I have a processing disorder, and my ADHD is very severe. So if you are like in a conversation with me for about 10 minutes, you'll pick up on it. And I really thought that museums were a place where a certain type of person worked and a certain type of person was accepted. Like if you're a visitor at a museum, you have to be a certain academic level. And I'm really trying to work really hard to shatter that. It's okay to come into a museum and go into this field and not be the smartest person in a class. Like I wasn't always a great student. I have ADHD, so I'm always all over the place. But I'm really passionate about this. And I just don't want anyone to be discouraged about joining a field you're passionate about. If you want to do it, make it happen and don't let anybody put like blocks up. And you're going to get rejection letters. That's why I said earlier, like accept them, learn from them. They're going to happen. And eventually you're not going to get one and you're going to get the right letter. And I also work really hard to make museums more accessible. So that's something I'm passionate about, whether it is people in wheelchairs physically getting into a historical space. Like that's a huge challenge. There's some museums that are historic houses that people who have any type of mobility aid, they can't get into it. So I'm working really hard with a great group of people to push that forward and also make exhibits more accessible too. So we're working on making different fonts, dyslexia fonts, fonts for people with ADHD, like all these different ways just to make people feel more welcomed. And I am passionate about that, and I work with a group separate from my actual job to make that happen. We work at night to work together and kind of brainstorm to help any museum we can. Like if you're a museum and you want to be more accessible, we are here to help. And a lot of us have either like a neurodivergent, their child is, they have somebody they love who has a mobility issue. We work together to try to help museums. We are not formalized though. We're just a group of people that have each other's emails. So if you're gonna like ask for names, we don't have one. We're just friends. But yeah, we're trying to make museums feel welcome to everybody.
So I was just gonna say, I hope that one day my work can help to serve as a guide for other people that are undergoing cultural preservation efforts. Because when I started my job, um, I researched like other tribes and kind of saw what they were doing and how they got their start, but there wasn't a whole lot of information necessarily out there, and it had to be adapted specifically to the needs of the Peoria tribe. And having guideposts kind of out there lets you see you're headed in the right direction, but it gives you hope that like somebody's been exactly where you're at and they made progress and they got somewhere and they did something amazing. And I've been so grateful to people in the field who have helped me to further my own understanding and to kind of redirect me in the right direction when I was pointed the wrong way. And so if I can help somebody in the slightest one day, that would be just awesome.
For me, I really want to get more young people excited about like archives. I think I get so frustrated when I tell people I'm an archivist and a certain group of people like, well, those are all going away, like, why do you need to do that? Or what does an archivist do? There's no point in that. Everything's digital or things like that. And so just making more young people aware that archives exist, archives can be exciting. They're not just dusty basements with spider webs. We have cool things. We're important. So I hope that I can help young people learn that we're here and we want to share things with everyone.
I'll just round it out by saying, like everyone else, like I want to pay it forward. I want to help people figure out how they can apply the skills in public history to everyday life, even if they start doing something that's completely astray from what we may consider like a traditional role, and just help the public realize that history is a lot more encompassing and a lot a lot more things than they typically think.
Unless we have any final remarks from the panelists, I think that was all that we had with that. Don't forget to write down their emails if you're interested in contacting any of them. All of them put their contact information in the chat. And Mary Kate, do we have some closing remarks?
Yep. Hi, everybody. First off, thank you all so much for spending this lovely hour. Thank you so much to our panelists. I know I learned a lot, and it's always great to hear from people from varied experiences. Just a reminder, if you want to be in touch with us as the committee, we threw our email in the chat. And we also have that upcoming student showcase. So if you guys are students right now, it's a way to kind of get yourself out there, maybe a little networking, kind of highlight some of your work on NCPH media. It'll be on Instagram, Facebook, and the formerly known as Twitter. And so be sure to look out. We love to have events like this. And if you ever have an idea for a panel or you have any further questions, feel free. But otherwise, thank you so much to Maddie for moderating and to our panelists and for you all for attending. Have a wonderful evening.